Ready to go? That's okay. Kevin, you're good? Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order. It's a special meeting of Committee of the Whole, it's Joe 7-18, dealing with the 2018 budget. And it's scheduled today, Wednesday, March 14th at 5:30 p.m. I'd ask the clerk, are there any addendum items, Mr. Recording Clerk?
There are none, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any? Well, first of all, can we confirm the agendas? Motion by Mrs. Butters, seconded by Mr. Bodner. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Any disclosures of interest this evening? There being none, it shall be so indicated. And ask Mr. Sinez to continue the presentation on the 2018 draft budget deliberations. Peter, can you come forward?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. To start, I guess we've provided to council, actually I sent it to you by email and provided you a hard copy tonight of where we're at as of the end of the last meeting. So that's what we'll be starting with in a moment. I just wanted to quickly go over the agenda again that we put together last budget meeting. We've talked about the base budget. We've done that. The levy summary review. We've done that. We didn't go through the programs and groups and services, so we can touch on that for a moment later on and see if there's anything if the council approves all of those. And then we'll get back to looking at where we left off at the last meeting. And there were some questions that council had of some of the departments, and I believe the departments have some answers to some of those questions. And so maybe, Mr. Mayor, if I may allow that each of the departments can maybe answer the questions before we get started, so that then at least council has those answers going into reviewing the operating levy again.
Okay, who wants to start?
Start at the other end.
Mrs. Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There was two questions that were presented to the planning department with regards to the budget, and one was with regards to the bylaw summer student, and a question with regards to research for what they did in Waterloo. I spoke with the City of Waterloo with regarding parking enforcement and parking officers, and their officers are provincial offenses officers that are certified under the MLEO, and those officers do parking on road allowances on municipal property, and all their officers are employees of the municipality. However, they have security guards to issue parking fines for property management on private property. And they must take a course. It's a $25 course and a test to certify the guard. And for private property, for fire routes, and disabled parking on private property only. The security guards do not ticket on any municipal property. So that's the difference in what they were looking for when they asked for deputized residents to do anything or do parking in the Pleasant Beach area, that type of thing. They do not write tickets on municipal property, just on private property, such as you would go to a plaza or at the hospital, that type of thing.
Thank you.
Do one at a time?
Are there any further questions regarding the Waterloo situation? Being none, go ahead with the second point.
The second question was with regards to the building division software. Parthos is a software that we're looking into with regards to having mobile inspect, which basically gives you the ability to do computerized note-taking, provide inspections, do photographs, and link it to a file. There will be fewer mistakes and errors when you're transcribing someone's hand notes into a file, as well as the ability to take the drawings and everything with you on site to the file instead of taking the actual file there. With regards to the funding on that, there are approximately 25 municipalities in Ontario looking at this right now. Waterloo happens to be the original on this, as well as St. Catharines just signed up for this. Now, they're both on the Amanda type system. We're on Lotus Notes. But I sat in on the Parthos presentation with the chief building official with regards to the ability to have the software and the connection to our Lotus Notes, explaining some design projects with them. And the monies that are allocated here are within that range. Now, it will take approximately, after 10 municipalities, the price should go down with regards to the funding. And right now, there is 8 municipalities that are seriously discussing that, and that would be at our 10 mark. Therefore, the pricing would go down, and that is also covered in our building revenue. And the yearly funding of the $10,300 annual cost is also the maintenance plus upgrades, and that's a yearly fee, but you get the upgrades, so that is included. Similar to what we do with our Ames parking program, we pay a yearly licensing fee and cost. So any upgrades to the system we get for free, and they add that in and they make sure that we're up and running.
Thank you. Does anyone have any additional questions of Mrs. Hanson on those points? Mr. Bodnar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had brought that one up, and I guess thank you for telling me how many municipalities actually have it, because it didn't really say in the report. So we could expect that yearly fee to come down then as it gets at least 12 municipalities, 10 municipalities on board? Is that the?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, they're looking at, that's a ballpark right now with regards to that. Because, as you know, most municipalities are in this process of doing their budget, and once it gets approved, then it'll be municipalities kicking on, and then the price will go down. It's just, they can't say an exact price right now because they don't know how many municipalities would be joining with that, and it would then reduce the funding.
Okay.
That would conclude your comments. Oh, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
May.
Through you to Sherry. Sherry, can any of that cost be absorbed in the service as opposed to putting it on the levy?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. With regards to the funding on this, the revenue that we receive with building department fees and excess of that, there's a portion of the legislation, Peter, correct me if I'm mistaken, with regards to building funds have to be used for building purposes. So the revenue for that would be worked towards this funding. So the increase in housing and permits that we get would offset and be able to balance out the amount owing for this. So we'll generate the revenue to pay for the service.
Thank you for that.
Any other questions of Mrs. Hanson? There being none, perhaps Mr. Lee. Calling you next.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to members of council. There was 4 items in particular that were brought up for further discussion. The first I'd like to address is the request for some additional stone to do road works and shouldering. The intent of that extra request was to cover the cost of some of the works that we're now having to do. We've acquired a couple of fire lanes that we haven't had in the past, along with this just doesn't cover shouldering per se, but this is used to top up the stone roads within the rural area. We've had a slight increase in the aggregate costs, so we're trying to account for that as well. And as I said before, we have some areas where it's been deficient that we have to do some work, specifically roads like Neff in the city, Kalali Street East. We have some shouldering issues there that we have to deal with. So that's the reasoning for the request for that specific one.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Bodnar?
Just because we have people watching, it's not that we went out and we're looking to acquire fire lanes, right? You know, just so someone on a fire lane doesn't think, well, great, the city's going to take over a fire lane. Years ago, can you just give us a little background on that so people know?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Bodnar. Yes, through the legal process, it was brought to our attention that a couple of fire lanes that we had originally thought were not ours had been deemed to be ours, taken over previously by councils along many, many years ago. So that being said, we're now fulfilling our responsibilities under that.
Your next point, Mr. Lee.
The next one has to do with some extra funds required for the building and yard maintenance. At this point, we're willing to scratch that and put it back to the original numbers. That being is that we'll go through this year and see how the entire year pans out under the new facility. We're hoping that we can achieve some economies there, and we're going to diminish that request now to back to its original. So there'll be no extra funds required for that. The other one of the other ones that we're talking about was brought forward about the tree trimming and the extra funds that were established with that. I've had discussions with my staff, and what we'd like to do is see if there is some potential in the coming year to look at maybe some revenue stream with the disposal of some of those woods that are being accumulated with the tree removal. That being said, we're looking at a number of options. We've talked back and forth among staff on what some of the possibilities may be. We'd have to do some further investigation as to liabilities and how we would store the wood, where it would be stored, or we have some different options. We would ask that council give us a year to try to develop those, and hopefully we can come up with something that's amicable to everybody. And at some point, potentially generate some revenue from that.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. That concludes your points?
There is
more?
one other.
ahead.
It had to do with the training. There was a request for staff development for another $3,000. And what I'd like to bring to council's attention is that we now have some new initiatives that we have to bring in. One of them, for example, would be forklift training. With the new facility, we have a forklift. So those types of safety training we're having to do. And things like confined space, we have a couple of new employees. We have to get them up to speed on those types of safety training, and this is what the extra funds are requested for.
Thank you. Any questions of Mr. Lee? Any of those points? Yes, Mr. Bodnar.
Thank you. Just to confirm, Chris, when you said, was it the building and yard materials for $2,404? Is that the one we're dropping?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Gregg, I don't know whether you had any questions or not.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, there's two items that I would like to update council on. Excuse me. At the last council meeting, there was an inquiry about staff reviewing available funding options for trails. So staff are in the process of reviewing those, specifically through the Niagara region. So I'm hoping at a future council meeting I'll be able to report back on that for council. In addition, Councillor Main, I believe, brought up a request for a business case for the retail store at the marina. Staff is also in the process of preparing that documentation, and it should be ready for presentation to council shortly.
Any questions of council? And those responses? Yes, Mr. Main?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Ashley. Yeah, that was my request, but I worked due diligently to this today, and I've got all the mess I've got in front of me to prove it. A lot of this needs to be done because this was brought up in 2010 when they had the advisory board for the marina, and there was some pretty astute people on that board. We had some engineers, we had business people, we had a counselor. I wasn't a counselor at the time, and it seems to me that we're still in the same boat, pardon the expression, because I knew Ron was going to use that one, after 10 years. That building, having said 700 slips, the jewel of Lake Erie has been presented, and I agree totally with that. But it has to stand on its own sooner or later. And the only way we can do that is I'd have to see a business plan. I have to see what money comes in, what money comes out. I'll give you a quick example, and Peter could probably answer this one. The U.S. funds part, when people come and pay in U.S. funds. On this, it's zero. What happens to that? Like if somebody comes in with a U.S. credit card and pays, is it automatically switched over to Canadian funds? or where does that money go?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, it gets converted to Canadian funds, because all of our financials are in Canadian funds.
Okay. That's my point. For me to vote on something, I have to know all the figures, I have to know all the facts, and I'm not trying to be whatever that I'm usually am, but I have to see it, I have to see it in writing, and a business plan for, I can understand the hot dog place. That looks pretty straightforward. The restaurant looks pretty straightforward. But our own business, to me, without a business plan, or without a spreadsheet, or whatever you're going to call it, to me, it makes no sense. So that was my request, and apparently we're working on it, and I'm satisfied with that. Thank you.
That would appear to include all the questions. Mr. Sinnes?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, I believe those were the majority of the questions that were asked by council. If there's any that missed, please raise it again, and we'll look at it, or staff may be available to answer those tonight if there was anything that council believes that we did miss.
Are there any additional questions that council may have? Yes, Mrs. Butters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Peter. So the summer student for the fire department, that's only one that we haven't dealt with or have.
Okay, we'll come back to.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Okay, are you ready to proceed, Mr. Sinnes? Oh, yes, Mr. Doucette.
Through you to Peter or Chris, you indicated that the extra 2,400 is not necessary to go back to the regular. What is the regular cost? So that means 2,400 comes off the levy, so we've got $2,400 worth of opening up there. And what was it, 24, about 7,600?
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I can answer that.
Sinnes?
It was, they wanted to be increased to $9,000,
Yep.
so about $6,600. 6,600 is the original.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Okay, please proceed.
Okay. There's a couple items that I do want to mention that council will probably want to discuss this evening while we go through back to the levy. One of the items that was brought back to my attention was the fact that we have now entered or completed the agreement with Rogers for the tower that's going up at the Godrich elevator. The revenue source for that for the city is on an annual basis is $10,000. So I bring that's not in the budget as revenue at this point. It's a question of, if you remember when we had the other tower go up there, the revenues that we were receiving from that, council decided that we should put that back towards the Godrich Reserve Fund for if ever we have to demolish that building years from now. We have some money, as you know, sitting in reserve, and that's accumulating and building, but we also have to spend some of that money on the building itself a few years back. And so the question becomes as to whether or not council wants to direct, I guess myself, that the $10,000 be directed to that reserve and continue that same process, that continue to build that reserve up over the years, and that annual amount go to the reserve. So that would be the one thing that council will have to decide this evening, because the $10,000 could reduce the levy on an annual basis, or we put it into the reserve. I would recommend we put it into the reserve. That's been our practice, but it doesn't mean that council can't change that practice either. So,
Could we have an indication of what council feels in this issue, Mr. Bodnar? And then Mr. Doucette.
Thank you. I'd be willing to make that motion. I think one time we figured it might be $1 million to tear that down. That was a number of years ago. It's probably creeping up on 2 million, so I'd be happy to make that motion.
Mr. Doucette?
To second that. The other question I have is that We used some of that money, like you said, to do repairs to the building and so on and so forth. That means that we're short by a considerable amount, if I remember right.
Correct.
So not putting that 10,000 in there would be reckless. So I think we need to make sure that we take advantage of everything we can to replenish that reserve and bring it up to an up-to-date cost, I think is critical for the city, okay?
Okay, we have it. Any further discussion? Mrs. Butters and then Mr. Main.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to Peter. So how much is in that reserve right now?
You had to ask.
I did.
Can I get back to you on that? I don't have that number in front of me now. I can't remember all the numbers. Yeah, I try.
That's probably not germane to the motion. Mr. Main?
Well, in a way it is, 'cause that was my thoughts about the reserve as well. How much of our lease agreement goes into repair? Any of it?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. We budget through the agreement $85,000 a year.
A year?
Yes.
Okay. Thought it was some.
Okay, if there's no further questions, Mr. Bodner, do you want to officially make that motion? And well, yes, that'd be good.
Okay, motion that we take the $10,000 that we're getting from the rent, would it be called rent from that tower, or lease, or
Lease, yeah.
lease?
Yeah, rent.
And put it into a reserve fund?
Seconded by Mr. Doucette. Any further discussion? There be none, call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Mr. Sinnet.
Mr. Mayor, I do have the answer for Councillor Butters now. I remembered I brought it with me. So the amount that we have right now in the reserve is approximately about $940,000. So well short of what we would need if we had to do anything with that building.
Any questions deriving from that? There's not. Yes, Mrs. Butters.
Thank you. Does anybody really know, like, what happens to these buildings? Like, we put in $85,000 a year of upkeep, right? It seems kind of sinful in a way to be putting $85,000 into a building that we intend to demo at some point, but does anybody have any kind of specs on what happens to these buildings? Because certainly, you know, like Godrich has them and other places. Is it like the usual thing that they get demoed, or do they get repurposed? Or I just kind of wonder, like, what actually happens in the real world to these buildings?
Any comments, Mr. Sinnet?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the original purpose when we bought the green elevator through Transport Canada was that the dollars that they provided us would be there for the eventual demolition of that building. Doesn't mean it's going to be demoed. The whole idea is that we have a vibrant business there right now, and that would continue on as long as possible. So the fact is that when the federal government provided us with those funds, it was a matter of, this is what you may need somewhere, sometime down the road. Doesn't mean that it's going to be now, or it could be 50, 100 years from now. But as long as the building is kept up, and that is part and parcel with some of the funds that we put in, some of the funds that the business puts in, it tries to keep it up and operational and running for the business itself. And as long as the agreement is in place, and as long as everybody's willing to continue with that process, then that's what the funds were there for. Based on the eventual, at some point in time, it may come to the point where the business moves out, and if the business moves out and if you can't repurpose it, then we may have to demolish it at that point in time. But as far as timing goes, hopefully it's a long time from now.
So in essence, that money could sit in the reserve for like ever?
Correct.
Okay,
And it's gaining interest, it's invested, and interest is accumulating on it.
okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Mr. Bodnar, Mr. Doucette?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Peter. Peter, this would come under that asset management plan too, wouldn't it? So we'd have to show that we're managing that building?
Correct.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Mr. Doucette?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Peter. Peter, I believe the 1.6 million that we originally got was there because it was an estimate done by a company that told us that's probably what it would cost to knock it down. Have we had an updated one of those? And the only reason I'm saying that is that, yeah, the money is going to sit there for a long time, but if and when we do that, if we're 3 million short, then that puts the city short. So it would be a good idea to have an update. Mind you, if we get an update and everything's okay and everything's fine, then we can start using that money for other things. We don't need to continue on building up the reserve because that's what that reserve is for. So that if we get an estimate and we've got $200,000 too much in that account, then at that point, that $200,000 could be used for something else. That's the way I see it. I may be wrong, and if I am, please tell me I'm wrong. But I see it as money that we will need if ever we need to demolish that building. And this is monies there that will help the city and do it. But we would need an update every once in a while, and I don't know how often we would need that update, but I believe we need some kind of an update to give us an idea of how much it would cost, so we know how much to put away. Just being prudent more than anything else.
Have any comments, Mr. Sinas?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't believe, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe we've had a recent estimate on what it would cost. And it's probably not a bad idea that at some point in time, every so many years, we look at it, because obviously the cost of it more than likely is going up rather than going down. And the question becomes, is the cost going up more than the interest that we're making on the money that we have in the account? So I think it's something that staff could probably look at and see if obviously it's going to cost us a few bucks to get the estimate, but it will give us an indication of where we may be at.
See if we're on the right track.
Sure.
Okay, we'll include, Pierre, we can include that discussion.
The next item is there was some indication, and so when we do get looking at our levy again, some indication about the continuation of live streaming. We do have, as you know, some dollars set aside for this for the budget meetings. It may be a little bit higher depending on how many more budget meetings we have. If tonight is the last budget meeting, we'll have actually funds remaining in what we were budgeting there, and to budget for the balance of the year would be less than our original estimate. And so if that's the case, we're probably looking at about $7,800 more that if council decides that they want to live stream for the balance of the year. So that's something to keep in mind when we go back to looking at where we are with our levy. So there's that item. The last thing, and it doesn't really affect the budget right now, but this is just sort of an announcement, I guess, of what I found out today, just about an hour ago. The federal government has come out and announced some of their programs for federal funding today, and it includes 4 different areas of funding that they're putting dollars towards for municipalities. And those areas are public transit, green infrastructure, community, culture, and recreation infrastructure, and rural and northern communities. We would, those are 4 different areas, so it would be, depending on if whatever we decide in the future, 4 different applications could possibly come out of that. This would be the program, I believe, that we would probably tap into for the downtown CIP. It's a matter of getting more information, finding out what the applications look like, what the criteria is, and so on. So we haven't received that yet, but we just received the actual announcement. What we did receive in actual dollars today was their announcement on the public transit side, of which they've actually earmarked dollars to each municipality that has public transit. So in the Niagara region, so for Port Colborne, my understanding is that over a 10-year period, we can apply for public transit funds that the fund will provide. Our portion is $239,041.93. Every municipality in the Niagara region that has public transit, including the region, is receiving these funds. Niagara Falls and St. Catharines receiving the majority of them, of the funds. But my understanding is it's applied for over a 10-year period. You can apply for it up front. You can apply for it over the 10 years. But it is for transit projects that are capital related. So once we get the information as to a little bit more detailed information, we'll be able to determine what we can potentially apply for. Because as you know, we really don't have a lot of capital works because we don't own the buses, and we just are paying for operations at this point in time. But there may be certain things that we can tap into with regard to bus shelters, accessibility, active transportation, bike lanes, that type of thing. And also I'll be talking to Welland Transit to see if there's any capital components that we're paying for through our operating. And we'll see if there's anything that we can apply for. So $239,000, it's a good chunk of funding, so we'll have to determine where we can fund those, or what projects we can fund out of that, and that'll be something that we'll have to bring back to council at a later date.
Any questions, Mr. Smith? First of all, Mr. Main, then Mr. Bodnar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To Peter, this 239, 4210 or whatever it is that over the 10 years or every year for 10 years?
Over the 10 years.
Over, okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Mr. Bodnar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Peter, just because we're talking about transit. When would we get an update on the transit system? How many riders, the cost, because Welland's going to up the cost, and we've changed a few routes, didn't we? We got some money for a Saturday trial or whatever, but when would we get kind of an overall how we doing thing?
Through Mr. Mayor, I'll be bringing, our agreement with them right now is up March 31st. I don't know if I'll have a report for March 26th, which means we'll probably, on a monthly basis, extend the current agreement to give us enough time. I've already had 2 meetings with Welland Transit, and so that's where we were told about the additional costs. There's something I'm working with in talking with the region on the regional transit side of things on, and we're bringing a report back to council with regard to, one, the operating agreement, continuation of the agreement, and that'll include the increased costs that I mentioned last meeting that we're budgeting for, and including where we are with regard to ridership. I don't have all the numbers calculated for the ridership for 2017 just yet, so I'll be able to give council sort of a little bit of the last 3 years or something like that, which I can say that our ridership has been declining over the last 3 years for whatever reason. As far as the grant, the extension of the community bus service to Saturday, we have put the grant application in. We're just waiting to hear back whether or not it's approved. And if it's approved, then I'll be bringing that back to council.
Any other questions? Peter, it's not too premature to be including this in the 2018 budget when all the details are not finalized?
Correct. Yes, I wouldn't look at it including in this budget, But once we know what we can do with the funds and so on, then we'll be bringing a report back to council to talk, because it is capital nature.
Okay. I fear there aren't any more questions. Could you continue, Ms. Sinnes?
Okay, I think that covers all of the sort of housekeeping items. What I would suggest then is that we go back to what I did provide council. You should have on your desk is a updated summary of what you see on the screen. And I had sent it to council electronically last week. So the items that were in light blue are the decisions that were made by council at the last meeting. There's items that were highlighted in red that were ones that council sort of wanted to come back to for discussion. And I think that's where we're at right now, is at this point is coming back to those particular items, or if there's other items there that council wants to discuss again. So I would, right now, what we're looking at is with, as it stands right now today, before we get started, is 6.69% levy increase, which is, when you look at the blended tax increase for the region and the school boards, is a 2.44% overall tax increase, or approximately $74 to the average assessed home in Port Colborne. As I mentioned before, there is talk right now of some slight changes to tax ratios, multi-res, commercial, and commercial tax classes. And if that was to take place, we could look at, it could change the overall tax increase from the 2.44% to 2.69% on the residential. Because what happens is, if they reduce the tax ratio for residential or multi-residential or commercial or any tax class for that matter, it basically shifts some of the dollars up to the residential class. So that's why you'll see a slight increase in the residential due to that fact of reducing some of those tax ratios. So I know that it's in discussion. They haven't brought it to regional council yet. They're working on a few models, and going to be bringing that to council shortly to finalize the tax policies, which then we have to follow as a lower tier municipality. So that's where we stand today, right now. So going back to the budget, the items that council highlighted for further discussion was the fire department summer student was highlighted, the stone repairs on roads and shoulders, and that was an explanation was provided by Chris on that. The building yard materials, $2,404. I think that was decided that could be eliminated from the budget. So I will do that. So if that comes off, that changes it a bit, not by much, but it changes it a bit. The other item was the Parks Division, the temporary works, the additional 10 weeks. Last year in 2017, council approved the temporary winter works person, which was initially scheduled for 20 weeks, and in 2017 said, well, we'll go for 10 weeks and bring the other 10 weeks in 2018, which we did. So that was something that council was still deciding on. And those were the only items that council was actually looking at coming back to. The other items were council all basically tentatively approved them going forward, and that's where we stand. So if there's any items there that council wants to raise or look at, then we can do that.
Mr. Doucette and Mr. Bodnar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Peter. The YMCA request, it says here, discuss with YMCA to review costs and revenues. Has that been done? Or is it coming? Or we need to know before we make a decision, so.
It will be done. We haven't had a chance to set that meeting up just yet. But I think what we also decided is that we would, though basically the dollars are not on the levy, The dollars for this would be coming out of the provincial funds, which we would put into reserve. And if we don't have to use those funds, then they would stay there.
Okay.
And
Okay.
be brought back to council to be used for some other purpose in the Valley Center.
I thought that's what we had said, but I just wanted to know if we had discussed it with the Y yet. That's all.
Mr. Bodnar?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Peter. Peter, the temporary winter works, additional 10 weeks. Just remind me about that, because our note says that half is levied in 2017 and half in 2018. Have we already committed to this money?
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Louis?
Sure, sorry. Through your worship to Councillor Bodnar, I'm going to jump in on this one. This is a little bit different than the item right above it. The item right above it is where we have some staff and we were looking to take them from 19 weeks to 24 weeks. This one was, if you recall back to the budget meetings last year, we were adding a person, we were adding 20 weeks. But because we were adding it in effectively May, by the time the budget was approved and we made the posting and we got the resumes and did the hiring, we only had to pay for half of it in 2017. So the person is hired, the person works here now, but we need to get the second half of the person's wage into the budget. So that's why you see half of the request. To deny this request would mean we'd have to go back and eliminate the position. That was council's direction from last year's budget.
Okay.
Mr. Bodnar?
So it's highlighted in red, but it seems to me we don't have any choice on that one. It's already committed, so, okay. Thank you.
Mrs. Kenny?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm trying to catch up here, so I just wanted to ask about this request from the Y. Why are they asking for this money? Can you, because I wasn't here, so it hasn't been explained to me, so.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the budgeted amount, or the budgeted year for the YMCA right now, over the last 5 years, basically they had a balanced budget, and there was some years they had a small deficit, other years they had a surplus, and it sort of balanced out. In the years that we had a surplus, actually, then it reduced the amount of money that we actually gave the YMCA for that particular year. With my understanding from their presentation is that majority of the increase that they can't cover at this point in time is the provincial increase of the part-time minimum wage. So the minimum wage went up from $11.60 to $14. So that has had because majority of all of their staff is part-time, that had a major increase in costs to the YMCA. They did raise their membership fees a bit last fall. They are looking at hopefully other ways of generating revenues and reducing some expenses, but at this point in time they're budgeting for that increased salary wages. And so what in our agreement with the YMCA, if there is a deficit, an actual deficit, then the city is obligated to look at paying 50% cost sharing of that deficit. We haven't had that issue going forward. So what they've done is just asked that if the fact that they're budgeting a deficit, that we would share in the deficit, the budgeted deficit. Doesn't mean that that's going to be the amount, because we'd have to again wait until the end of the year and see where things fall out. And what they did do is the surplus that was in 2017, they reduced the amount that of our 50%. It was about $2,000. So essentially, we're obligated under our agreement, and we are going to speak with them again to determine whether or not there's things that they can be doing and should be doing in order to try to reduce their expenditures or increase their revenues, so at the end of the fiscal year, they don't have a deficit and we don't have to spend that money. But it's prudent for us to set aside those dollars right now, even though we may not use it, And it's not on the levy, so it's not something that's affecting our tax levy, but at least we're gonna have it there in case it's something that we do have to use in the future.
Additional questions? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
Yeah.
Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you for that explanation. But everyone knew that increase was coming on the minimum wage for quite a while. So they weren't planning on listening to that information that was given to them a long time ago to budget for that? So we're paying really for an increase in wage, really what it is, that you're telling me. We're taking it out of the Ontario Municipal Provincial Funding, we're taking that out of there. Or we've got it listed as coming out of there, so it doesn't affect the levy, but I would have thought there would have been a little bit more thought going into that. So when you have your talk with them, I would be suggesting that obviously they weren't budgeting or planning ahead, because everyone knew that was coming. Everybody. Everyone that owned a business knew it was coming. So obviously, in 2017, they should have been planning for that. You said they increased memberships and all that, but obviously, they weren't taking into account the fact that this was going to happen, because that's how most companies recoup that, right? They charge a little bit more on something they were selling to get that money back. So I wasn't happy when I saw that, and I don't like that it's showing that it's coming out of that, because that money could be used for other things in the city. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs.
Thank you.
Kennedy. Alderman Demery.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Peter. Peter, I would echo everything B just said. When you're having your discussions with them, I would suggest they think about the future a little bit more in their budget planning. But if we're obligated to pay 50%, then we're obligated, and that's all that we can do about it. Do we also reap the benefit of getting 50% of any surplus they may have? Is that in the paper as well?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we actually receive 100% of any surplus,
Excellent.
and we
Thank
have
you.
in the past.
That's good. Thank
Yes.
you.
Mr. Bodnar.
Just on that YMCA thing, I guess what I would like to see is that the way the YMCA cuts this down is reduce programs, reduce subsidy to families that can't afford it. There's a lot of families get free, so I think we got to be a little careful of what what we're asking for. I wouldn't like to see those eliminated, but hey, if you want to run it like a business, I guess I'd be looking at that if it was my business, or maybe Frank would if it was his business, So, in those discussions, before you settle on anything, maybe you might want to run it by council to see whether we're willing to have those programs reduced or subsidies cut for people that can't afford it. Thanks.
Mr. Sinnes, there was some chatter on the internet today about some deficiencies in the maintenance of the Valet Center, and some suggestion it could be the responsibility of the Y to rectify these. Would you be looking into that before you strike your deal with the Y?
I can actually step in on that one.
Okay, Mr. Louis.
Sure, through your worship to council, we did get some social media reports of, I guess, issues in the dressing rooms, change rooms on the YMCA side, not the hockey arena side of the facility. We were unable to reply to that person directly because they are not in conflict, they're not friends with the city in social media, so everybody knows how that works, but we did have one council member who was able to say that staff are working on it. And coincidentally, I was already in a meeting with the director and the supervisor, and we were able to talk about that, and we are going to work with the Y to make sure that that's rectified, as well as some issues on the city side of the building.
Thank you, Mr. Louis. Okay, and we've exhausted all the questions on this issue. Mr. Sinnes, do you wish to proceed?
It's, it's at, Mr. Mayor, it's at council's pleasure as to if there's any other items there that council wants to discuss, or if there is no other discussion or reductions or additions, that council wants to put forward, then we would look for council's approval on the budget as it stands, but I believe there may be other things.
Mr. Doucette has his hand up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Any student summer help, I know that the last time I requested and asked if we could find out if funding is still available through the federal government for that, or have we completely lost the ability to put in funds this year for that? So I think it's important for us to know that. There's a few other places where there's students and extensions, and I think we need to know, are we going to get some money or not?
Go ahead.
Sorry. So through your worship to Councillor Doucette, after the budget meeting where that was discussed, I did go back to HR to see what programs there are that are available to us. Now, we do often apply for, well, every single year, that is, we apply for Canada's Summer Jobs Program, which is a wage subsidy. It's not a full wage. And that deadline has already passed for the year, and we do hope to get a few approvals on the staff that we did hire. The other program that's available is Experience Ontario, and it's very much, it's still open, but very much tailored towards culture and tourism. So the fire student would not, I guess, qualify for the subsidy there. So unfortunately, I think because of the time of the year, that this would be 100% paid by the city.
Thank you.
Mr. Maine.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On the same topic, to Mr. Louis, I guess I can answer this. We were asking for a decrease in summer student to be replaced by the part-time seasonal guy. Now, I think the cutoff was January the 6th for summer student applications, if I'm not mistaken, the 6th of January. So if we're going to get rid of somebody at the marina, is there a possibility that this person or this position, whether it's funded, could be moved to the fire department? Or is that all over with?
So now
You know what I'm saying?
Sure. So through your worship to Councillor Maine, if I understand the question correctly, because we're adding seasonal staff to the marina, we're reducing the number of students in the marina, and I think to Mr. Sinnes, the question is, did we reduce the budget accordingly, or do we have enough money in the budget to allocate that to the fire department?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to answer that question, the amount that we're adding to the budget for the marina staff is net of the savings that we would have had with the student.
Thank you. Mr. Danch.
Sticking with that same question there, so if we do the math on that 9,400, taking it at are we thinking that's a 40-hour week that guy would put in at the fire hall? Or would it be less than that, Chief?
Chief Cartwright?
I was waiting for my opportunity.
Thought you were asleep.
Through your worship, the council, I met with HR and we identified the period of time of approximately 16 weeks. It's a 35-hour work week, and the rate of pay was given to me by HR based on the new student rate on the minimum wage, and that's the number that's come forward.
I'm sorry, you said a 35-hour week?
That's correct. I'm not sure what the hourly rate will be for summer students at this time.
1727, I'll carry the penny, 1728. I'd like to apply for that job.
That includes.
I just wonder if we couldn't, you know, with the volunteers that we have in the community, could we not save us $9,500 and have a volunteer maybe possibly fill in some of those hours there and get rid of that idea? We have 30-plus volunteers.
Chief Cartwright?
Your worship, I'm assuming you're talking a volunteer firefighter?
Yes.
They were paid $43 an hour last year.
Yeah, we know that. So I'm just saying, I wonder if we could not maybe, you know, get one of the guys to fill in. Not one person, of course. I mean, we've got the course of the summer. There's 16 weeks. Can we not get one of those guys to fill in this position to help out with answering the phone and whatever else you had there?
Chief Cartwright?
Your worship, through yourself to Councillor Danch, I'm not going to say no to that. There's a possibility. If there was people available, we could certainly look at that. We haven't looked at that particular time. We looked at a summer student based on what other departments are using for short periods of time.
I just see that $17+ an hour for a summer student. That's a pretty good job for answering the phone.
Through your worship to council, we do pay the students on a student wage rate that we have here. It starts at the student minimum and it goes up by the number of years of service. But the wages that you see include the burden, which is unemployment insurance and CPP, workers' comp, and employer health tax, because as a municipality, we still have to pay employer health tax. So that's a net rate of pay. We do pay at the student rate for the whole city.
Sorry, and what would that student rate be?
Anybody?
Thanks, Mr.
14, I believe it is, 14 something, 1425?
18, right?
1450.
1450.
It appears that's the end of this issue.
Your worship, if I could just add a couple points that have come to my mind since we had our last meeting. I would also like to say that right now our assistant, who's been in that position for a number of years, is working between 4 and 6 hours every Saturday on overtime to try to catch up from what happened last year and to get our files in order for this coming year. So we're reducing the overtime, and the other thing it will do is, as I said before, fill in for vacation periods and probably give her the ability to be able to deal with fire department issues rather than dealing with people coming through the door all the time. As you all know, we've increased our public safety program significantly in the city, and with that comes the workload increase. That particular position, and I'm not here to give anybody a hard time, has been in place for about 20 years or so with no increase in staff whatsoever. And quite frankly, I believe this is a minimal request on behalf of us to try to get a better level of service, because I think that's what council wants in this particular issue.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions on the Chief's remarks? It would appear that we've exhausted our questions on this, Mr. Sinnes.
The streaming, I don't know if they want to use, do you want to do anything with the streaming?
Oh, Mrs. Butters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Okay, so my only other question to do with this summer student, would that summer student be someone different? Like, if this goes into the levy, then that will stay in there to fund that summer student for the next however long it's in there, right? So the summer student will always be changing. Does the chief have any concerns about a lack of continuity in that position?
Chief Cartwright, thank you.
Because you have a very specific kind of department, you know?
Through your worship, obviously, the more years an individual works in that position is more beneficial to us. Unlike the student that works in HR, I believe that same student has come back for a number of years, and if that student were to be available, obviously we would look in that direction. But again, I believe there's a lottery type draw that's done within the corporation, and I don't know that I would have control of that.
Thank you, Councillor Butters. Any other questions of the chief before I let him go again? Yes?
Well, I was just going to make the motion to leave it in then, to leave it in.
Seconded by Madam Demery. All those vote? All those in favor? Opposed? One opposed. It's carried. Mr. Sinnes?
So at this point, Mr. Mayor, I think what I'll do is come away from this budget summary at the moment, and I just want to bring up the programs, groups, and services. It's on page 34 of your binder. And I just want to, if council has any questions with regard to these items here. So You have a number of groups that we're actually funding, so I think I bring this up every year just so the council's aware of, still aware of the groups and committees that we are funding. Because last year, actually, we took out we used some reserves to fund some of the committees last year. With the amount of reserves we have now for those groups, I don't think we'd want to do that again this year, but we did it last year. But we do have the groups, and you can see them on the screen there, and it's on page 34 of your binder. So I'm not sure if council has any questions or concerns about any of the dollars that we're giving to the groups. You can see what they are, and some of them have increased due to the 2%. Some of them stay the same as they have been over the last number of years. So we have the groups. We also have certain committees that we have, and there's certain budgets for those committees on an annual basis. And some of them do have some in reserves for different projects that's ongoing that they're working on. And we also have some management agreements, as you know. We have Bethel and Shirkston, which we provide an $8,300 grant to. We did increase that up. It used to be about $7,500. And just the events that we do put on and some of the costs in that. We have our events that are taking place this year. And we still have the CIP incentives that we're including also in the budget for the downtown area and areas that need it, brownfield and industrial and so on, all the different CIPs. So those are all items that are still in the budget, and will continue to be in the budget unless council decides otherwise. And if you're fine with it, then we'll move on.
Council had an opportunity to review those expenditures, and are you happy with them? Mr. Dench?
I apologize for being late, but I'm trying to keep up here. That, Peter, I'm sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, the $25,000 for Berkeley, that's every year, that fishing derby?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councilor Danch, that was a 2-year agreement, so it was last year and 2017 and 2018.
So that's a $50,000 commitment we have for the 2 years, right? So this would be the last year for that this year?
Unless council decides to continue on, if they decide they want to try to continue on.
Just, we know how last year went. I mean, the weatherman was not considerate, and I really hope that this year those guys do get on the water, because if they don't, we're throwing away a lot of money for no reason there.
Any other comments on any of the items? Mr. Viner?
Just because I brought this up when we brought it in, the feral cat program, when I first voted for that, I thought it was a helping hand to get that program off. And can anybody tell me, do they have a surplus in there? Do they send us any info? Have we got it in there?
Yeah, there's a statement in the materials.
Through Mr. Mayor, you would have received their request and financial information in the last meeting or the first meeting, yes. One of the two.
Yes.
So you should have that information. They had a letter, and they had their 2017 statement of receipts and expenses and their 2018 budget.
Mrs. Butters, or could you speak up, please?
Did you find it, Councilor Bodner? I can show you mine if you want.
I'll just grab a copy while I'm.
Any questions on that, Mr. Wagner?
So they have $20,000 in the bank? Am I reading that right?
That's what their financial statement says. have a follow-up question, Mr. Bodnar? Councilor Butters, do you have some more insight on this?
Well, I mean, you can see by the receipts and the expenses, if you look across what the expenses are, expenses above receipts, pretty much all the money that comes in does get spent. And what I would want you to kind of look at is the 5,000 that the city contributes. You know, they raise an incredible amount of funds through the work of volunteers. When you look at the vet fees of, $27,483, what we contribute is a pittance towards the vet fees, and that's basically what the 5,000 goes to, is for the actual spaying and neutering. It doesn't go to food and litter and fostering and all those other things. It goes for the cost to the vet only, and only for the Port Colborne cats. They did some 242 cats in 2017 at an average cost of $100 per cat. So even if you went by that number, we're paying maybe 20% of that vet bill, and the rest of it, the volunteers work really hard to raise 80% of the money to just pay the vet bill, never mind all the rest of the stuff. So they managed to put together some programs that actually are reducing that problem in Port Colborne every year, expanded into the area of companion animals for folks that have a lower income that have real problems, being able to afford to get their cats spayed or neutered. So they are able to assist people so that cuts out a whole other level of unwanted litters. So they attack that problem on not just one level, but all the different aspects of why we end up with overpopulation of cats and unwanted ones. So I don't know, I used to get a lot of phone calls with problems to do with ferals and damage and all kinds of stuff. And those phone calls have all but disappeared. Like they are when they can do that many cats, that's having a huge impact on having a whole lot less problems running around causing people headaches. So I think that the program is working. I looked at Merrimack, this place in the States, which is a community so similar to ours. They're on a river instead of a lake or a canal, and it took them 15 years, but they got down to one cat that was a free-roaming community cat, a feral, on the riverfront. But they were actually able, in 15 years, to eliminate the problem of unwanted and, unowned cats. So that's encouraging, and I think that we're on that path now. When you figure that a small group of volunteers is able to pull that off with really a relatively small contribution from the city, but a heck of a lot of hard work on the side of the volunteers. Like, we're getting probably one of the best bangs for our buck. I think Peter figured it out one time for me that was under 50 cents per, was it 50 cents per household? Or 35 cents, or some really small amount of money per household that has a huge impact in terms of improving what was a bad situation. So I think it's money well spent myself.
Mr. Bodnar, and then Mrs. Demaray, Mr. Doucette, and Mr. May. Mr. Bodnar,
Thank you,
want to
Mr. Mayor.
continue?
Look, this is a very dynamic group. They're able to raise some funds there where a lot of groups can't. They work very hard. My only concern is that they started with $24,000. After the year, they were $4,000 down, but they still got $20,000 in the bank. We look at our reserves and say if there's reserves there, should be using it rather than go on the levy. My question is that, some point, Councilor Butters stated, the cat problem is going to be getting under control. I guess what I don't want to see is this spin off then into something other than just a feral cat thing where they're doing very good things for the community, but you know, when do we say we're going to reduce our grants a little bit as your bank account gets up to 20, 24, you know, maybe 28? Because they are fabulous raising funds. They got great events, you know. I just want to highlight that, you know, my thought when I initially voted for this was that it was going to be something to start them off and get going. Well, they're going very well, actually, and thank you very much for what you do. But, you know, at some point, I think we got to look at this and just say, you know, does it need to be 5? Can it be 4? You know, I just wanted to highlight that. Thanks.
Councilor Demery.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would agree with everything Councilor Bodner just said and everything Councilor Butters said. But I think it comes down to the fact that we need to do our part. And this is our part as far as controlling the cat population in Port Colborne. We don't have any other way of doing that. And we don't have, even the Humane Society does not deal with cats. They're not out there trapping cats. They're not out there taking care of the problems around cats. This is the only group that is doing that. And I think it's a small price to pay for the city of Port Colborne to make sure that its residents do not have a whole pile of feral cats running around and all kinds of problems that go along with that. So it really does help. And it is helping control those people who are not responsible pet owners and don't take it upon themselves to go out and make sure that the spade and neutering gets done and that those cats are properly dealt with. This group does do that. So it makes a huge difference, and I just still think it's our part to pay and that we should be doing that.
Councilor Doucette, Councilor Main, and then Councilor Butters.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. It's working. I mean, we used to have quite a few litters around our house every year. We used to have little kittens, and you'd see them, and you'd see the mother, and so on and so forth. That's not happening anymore. They were all feral, and then we now have one male who has almost looks like a lynx, but he's the only one that's in the area, and he's the only one you see. You don't see any other cats. Because especially with our home, we could see down Christmas Street, and it was almost like a stepping stone in the street. They would come out into the street, and they seemed like there was one female here, one female there, one female, and then the male would. That's not happening anymore. So it's working, and what we have to understand is it's not an issue that someone else will take care of. It's a city issue. And we're not the only city that has this issue. And what's important is that we keep some of our feral cats out. Because if we don't keep them, once they're neutered, they're put back out. That means that strays from colonies of people that aren't taking care of their cats are going to take over where our colonies were, and then we're going to wind up with the same issue again. So I think it's a worthwhile project. We started it. It's working. We need to monitor it. I agree with Councillor Bodner. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we make everyone understand it's a city issue and it needs to be dealt with the city. $5,000 is a drop in a bucket, after all I'm concerned, to solve an issue that I remember when I got on council way back in the late 90s, beginning of 2000. I mean, even Councillor Steele at one time was part of a committee that was going to try to find a solution. This has been going on for years, and he couldn't find a way to solve the issue. This has. So we need to continue it.
Thank you, Councilor Doucette. Councilor Main.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through to everybody else. I too had the feral cat problem. That seems to have gone away. And I agree with Mr. Bodner that it should be monitored, just for the fact that it should pay for the need. If you have 100 cats, then you need the $5,000. You need 50 cats, you might need a little bit less. Or in the other part, you might be a little bit, excuse me, a little bit more. But having said that, is there any way to divert this reservoir or reserve to neuter and spay the people who originally owned these cats? Because why should I pay for it? You know what I'm saying? Is that possible?
You gonna be the first volunteer?
Yeah. I think this already happened a couple of times.
Thanks for your comments, Mr. Maine. Mrs. Butters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to build a little bit on what Councillor Demery had said that nobody else is taking care of this. I want to just point out that a very short few years ago, our Welland Humane Society used to euthanize 80-some% of the cats brought in. And because of programs like this and some really good things that they've done in their group as well, that number has turned to now only 20%. It's actually reversed. So they do a really good job, a better job in not having to, and you know what, it costs a lot of money to kill animals, and we were given a figure of about $100 per cat to have them euthanized. So to me, this is like the way of being very humane as well as being fiscally responsible. The amount of animals that are put down for no more better reason than the fact that nobody wants them, and they're that's not the best way to deal with this. Cutting it off at the source and not having litters and litters and litters of unwanted sickly kittens is really the way to go here. So yeah, I think it is us doing our part. The other thing I wanted to mention too, I read just recently that City of Windsor is putting somewhere in the realm of $50,000. Their feral cat problem is like right out of control, and they're putting forward, I don't know, $50,000 I read to for a spay-neuter type program. And talk about, I don't know that that's going to serve them really well, because I don't know that that's going to get down to the root of all that problem either, because it's kind of multifaceted. But when I think of our $5,000 and I read Windsor's $50,000, I was kind of grateful.
Okay, I think it's decision time. Mr. Bodner.
I agree with Councillor Maine. I won't put any money towards it, but bring that up next budget. We might be able to use that one. Look, before I get a bunch of hate mail emails and vilified on Facebook, I have cats, okay? I'm not, and we took one in, found one last fall that showed up on our deck and it was lost and skinny, and so we took him in. He's the best cat ever. He's fabulous, right? But I just think that, if we pulled the $5,000 out, this program would still run quite fine. They still got reserves, so that's all I'm saying. So we need to monitor that. God bless them. I hope they got $30,000 in the bank next year. I know they could do it. So, anyways, don't send me any emails. I love cats. Thanks.
Okay, on this issue, is there anyone wish to move forward with it, to make a motion, either to leave it in or to take it out? I guess take it out. You made that motion to retain? A second? I guess we need a vote. All those in favor? Opposed? I don't see any opposition registered. Are there any other sums here that go to groups and programs and services within the community that anyone would like to change or amend or increase? There being none, then I guess we're content with leaving it in as is, Mr. Sanas.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Then, right now then, as we stand, if there's no other additions or deletions to the levy portion, there was no other issues with any of the other items that were there that are being funded through the provincial funding or reserves. With that said, we are at a 2.44% overall tax levy. Well, nobody's brought it up.
Question, Mr. Louie?
Oh, sorry. Through your worship, to council, or I guess to Mr. Sinez, I heard some discussion of the streaming, but I didn't hear any final decision made on that.
Yeah. No, yeah, the council would have to bring that up if they want to add that in.
Councillor Demery.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I'm sorry, I just automatically assumed that if nobody took it out, it was just in. So I would actually like to have that added in. I think that's really good value for the money. And I know that I received a lot of positive feedback, as well as read a lot of positive remarks out there on social media. So I think it's something that the public wants to see, and it gives, again, more direct access to what happens in their city hall, and that's always a good thing. So I would like to see that left in.
Yes, Mr. Sinus?
Just so, right now, Mr. Mayor, right now we have budgeted $3,000 out of the OMPF funds. If council is looking at continuing live streaming for the balance of this year, with the funds left from the $3,000, because I think we've over budgeted that for the budget meetings. Only if tonight's the last night of the meetings, we'd be looking at an additional $7,800 or $8,000 for the balance of the year with what we have there already. So I will leave it to council to
Prepared to make a
give
motion.
us a direction.
Yes,
Continue with
my
it.
motion is to leave it in and to do the live streaming for the balance of the year.
Seconder for the motion? Councillor Doucette, question, Mr. Bodnar?
Through you to Peter. Peter, 7,800 isn't in the budget though,
No.
right?
We'd be adding it in right now.
So we're adding it, we're increasing the levy. for
Correct.
that. Do we have any commitment to Cogeco? I would assume this would take over from Cogeco?
So through your worship to Councillor Bodnar, that's a good question. The streaming is different than Cogeco in a couple of ways. Cogeco historically has broadcast council meetings all throughout Niagara. They own the broadcast up until a few weeks after. Well, I think they own it forever. We don't even get a copy of it until a few weeks after, so it's not actually available to our residents on the city's YouTube channel until about 3 weeks after the fact. It's not broadcast live, it's broadcast the next day, and I think there might be some rebroadcasts, but they're not particularly reliable. And while we hope that they're going to do it forever, there's no guarantees of that. The streaming is a little bit different because it is live, it is available beyond Niagara, which we know Cogeco is not, and it is available to us right away. We own the video, so people can watch it the next day. For example, I've had people say they couldn't finish the budget meeting, probably too exciting, and had to finish it the next day. And I do know that Mr. Jack from WeeStream is willing to answer any questions that council might have as well. So we're hoping that it will be both. Short answer, maybe too late for that. The short answer is both Cogeco and WeeStream.
Any other question? Go ahead, Mrs.
Thank
Kenny,
you. So
and
just
then Mr.
through
May.
you, for you to Mr. Louis. So if we go live stream, residents who only have the TV to watch meetings cannot now view it.
No. So, sorry, through your worship to Councillor Kenny, maybe I wasn't clear. Cogeco will stay. There will always be Cogeco, or as long as
So they're going to come
Cogeco,
like they do now?
they will continue to come.
Okay.
And they'll broadcast on Tuesday mornings, or is
Sure,
it
Tuesday
still
mornings,
Tuesdays?
yeah.
Yeah. And that'll be available. But what this does is gives us an extra additional channel for people who don't have Cogeco, for people who own property in Port Colborne but live outside of Niagara and still want to watch a meeting. Even people who are traveling would be able to watch a council meeting.
So they would view this then on which, okay, if you have a computer, Councillor Doucette.
Right.
But what about the individual who does not have a computer?
So they would still, through your worship to Councillor Kenny, they would still have the Cogeco feed. If you had neither a computer or Cogeco, so Cogeco will still be there.
Sure.
If you had neither, I guess you could attend a meeting.
Yeah.
That's for sure. You could go to our library and use the devices that are there.
Okay.
There's other
I just
channels.
want options for
Sure.
them, that's all.
Valid.
Okay, thank you.
There was another, Mr. May, did you have a hand up?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick statement. Which one of these groups edits, or they don't edit?
Live stream doesn't edit.
Through your worship to Councillor Main, there is no editing of what transpires at a council meeting on Cogeco or WeeStream. At Cogeco, on both services, we're really at the mercy of the operator of the cameras. So in Cogeco, you'll see the camera move from one speaker to another, and that's done on the fly. There's no post-production that's done in the Cogeco studios. Same, but a little bit different for WeeStream. So you'll see with WeeStream, there's a number of cameras, and there's an operator who is in the in the council chambers and chooses which camera to show, typically ensuring, I would say always ensuring, that it's the speaker, or in some cases, two people at once. It can focus on a council member and a person at the podium, or it can also be split on a presentation and a speaker at the same time, or just the presentation, but it's really at the discretion of the operator, and there is no post-production.
Mrs. Demery, did you have your hand up?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just actually showing Councilor Kenny what it looks like on YouTube when we're doing this, just so she can see the difference between live streaming and Cogeco. But today, there are so few people that do actually subscribe to Cogeco now, whereas before there were quite a few more. Now people are using Android, they're using satellites, various means of getting their TV. So we do need to have more than one way for them to be able to see what happens in their council meetings. And I absolutely believe that between live streaming and Cogeco and newspapers, we're going to do the very best we can to make sure that everybody stays in touch with what's happening in their city. That's what's important. So again, there's a cost, but there's a cost to everything today. And I just think this is one of those value for dollar things.
If there's no further discussion, Mr. Bodnar.
So what do we do? Sign a contract with the,
Mr. Lowy.
and do they guarantee they won't get down to one camera? You know, like, you know, I mean, it's going to get very popular. I'm sure they're all over. They do a bunch now, but I mean, obviously there's a minimum standard, and you know, we can be assured that it remains it.
Sure. So through your worship to Councillor Bodnar, that's a good question about the contract. The simple fact is that for this, for what staff thought would only be the couple of budget meetings and possibly the water wastewater budget, we went with a direct appointment of a service that does a number of councils in Niagara. If we were going to award the entire year's worth of meetings, I think we would have to go to a competitive process to make sure that it's fair for everyone. One of the, I guess, nuances with that is I don't think there's very many providers out there who offer the type of turnkey service that this provider provides, specifically not having to buy our own cameras and sending their own operator, not a city staff person, at an hourly wage to record the meetings. So it might be a limited pool that's able to bid on the job. For the second question, if it's okay with council, I might have the actual operator and owner of the company, Kevin Jack, go to the podium and answer that.
Mr. Jack, would you like to take the podium, sir?
Set myself up so we see it. I'll take her.
Okay.
The second.
Mr. Bodnar.
Yeah, so can you give us a little explanation of what we could expect if we have your company do it?
You
Standards?
could expect to see the same level of service that we provided for now our third budget meeting. As for a minimum number of cameras, we would never fall below the minimum number of cameras to execute the job. Today, we're running 7 camera angles. I don't see us ever doing less than 7. And if we got into a scenario where we were double, triple, quadruple booked, we would actually go acquire more equipment to ensure that we maintain the same level of service.
Anyone else have a question for Mr. Jack? Mr. Lowy? Nothing? Okay, thank you for your attendance.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm ready to call the vote. Do you have a question, Mr. Sinnet?
No, I was just gonna let council know, in adding the $7,800 to the levy, the difference is about $1 on the average assessed tax levy. It goes from $73 overall to $74 on the tax levy. And if the region has some changes, it goes from $81 to $82.
So we have a motion to continue with live streaming to the end of the year. It's moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried.
So, Mr. Mayor, if there are no other additions or deletions to the budget,
Oh, Mr. Bodnar.
I have a question.
Just, I couldn't get it in before we voted, but we couldn't take advantage of part of that Smart Cities initiative. There's no money for something like this, is there?
Pretty smart of us to do it.
I'm sure we could take that under advisement.
Scott?
Check it out. Mr. Sinets will make an inquiry. Okay. Mr. Sinets, I think we're okay now.
Okay, so, Mr. Mayor, I'd be looking for a motion from council to approve the operating budget as presented.
Mr. Bodnar, you wish to make that motion?
I'd love to make that motion, Mr. Mayor, that we
Have a
approve the.
seconder for that motion? Councilor Demeray, discussion? And no discussion, call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Sinets.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're not done yet. So, we do have the capital budget to review and approve by council. And shouldn't take too long on that. Just quickly, federal gas tax funds that we do have available in 2018 is $672,000, of which we budgeted in the capital budget $622,000 of it to go towards roads, and $50,000 towards facility LED lighting, of which we would get additional hydro savings and potentially some grants for those expenditures. So I just wanted to show council that that's in the capital budget that I'm going to show you right now. So I did provide to council the last budget meeting. There's 3 pages, and it is called the Funding Capital Amortization, Funds Transferred to Capital Projects. So there are 3 pages. What the differences are between what was in your binder originally, when you looked at that, is the items that I have highlighted in yellow, and I'll just quickly go over those. The museum, the furnace air conditioner assessment was originally at $8,000. We had to confirm that price, so it's actually about $10,000. So that's in there. The for communications and marketing, in order to connect the Valley Health and Wellness Center, the Operations Center, potentially Roselawn and other facilities. There's software that we're looking at purchasing for $5,150, so we've added that in. The Canada Summer Games, I didn't have this in the original one, and I just remembered about it when we were coming to the first budget meeting, and that is we are participating, Port Colborne, in the Canada Summer Games 2021. And the report had come to council in 2017 for us to be dedicating $7,500 a year for the 4 years so that we have the funds available for our capital purchase of nets and so on. Port Colborne's going to be hosting the volleyball tournament, I believe, and some in the gymnasium, some practice time and so on. So our involvement is there, and we are committed to share in the capital cost of the equipment that's required for all of that. The run, I think we're involved into I don't know if it's a 5K run or 10K run, but Port Colborne is the host community for the run. So I added that in because we are committed to that. Facility fire systems update to meet fire code. Right now, all of the facilities are being looked at, and we have specified certain facilities, Roselawn and City Hall here actually, and upgrading our fire sprinkler systems. And so we've estimated about $25,000 that we would need for other facilities in order to bring everything up to code there. So we've added that in. The Pleasant Beach waste collection enclosures. This has been a discussion for a while. So for security cameras and installation, $4,000, and to enclose the roof, about $3,000. So that $7,000 has been added in and funded out of the capital levy. And those were the only changes. So out of the first two pages that you have, those are all the 2018 requests. I think the third page is mostly 2017, so it's just there as for comparison purposes. And so I would suggest that if there's any items that councilors had any questions on or wanted more information and discussion on, that we look at those individually. And then at the end of the day, we would look at approving the whole capital budget as presented with any amendments or changes. But all of the items that are here that staff have brought forward are funded through either the capital levy itself, which is included in our overall levy, and through reserves or grants.
Are there any particular items, Madam Butters?
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to Peter and then to whomever, I'm not sure, but I would like to know what the time frame is for doing the roof on Sherkston Community Center as well as Bethel. I know that they're experiencing leak problems and have been for a while. So if I could get a time frame on those as well as a time frame for the to complete the Pleasant Beach enclosure.
Mr. Sinets, Mr. Lee.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Butters. First of all, the enclosure, if the dollars and cents that are in this current capital report for that are approved tonight, then we would initiate the purchase of the roof and arrange for the installation as soon as possible. With regards to the roofing of the community centers, those funds, as you know, have been allocated, and those contracts will be initiated within the next month or so. So it'll be a case of mobilization or availability of the contractors once we sign agreements. And those reports will be coming to council in the future once we've gone through the tender/quotation process.
Any further questions, Councilor Butters? That's it? Anyone else have a question? There would appear, Mr. Bodnar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Ashley. I don't see it in here, but it might be out of the general parks fund. A few little upgrades to Centennial Park, other than the roof that's specifically mentioned here. The fixing the parking lot and a couple other things. Is that just in the general funds, just because I don't see it here?
Ms. Gregg?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bodnar. Yes, those are allocated in the general fund.
Ms. Gregg, does that include the request for additional sand in the ring for horse shows?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mike, can you offer some assistance? No. That's separate? Mike's going to take the podium.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. For the most part, the horse show rings are maintained by the group themselves. So we haven't had to make any addition to any sand or anything like that. But I mean, we're willing to help out, but usually the amount that's needed isn't normally a large amount, so we'll just usually fund it through our general budget. So.
Do you have a question, Mrs. Demery? No? Okay. Thank you, Michael. Okay, any other questions? There being none? Yes, Mr. Sinets?
Just the one thing I wanted to bring to council's attention, because I know it's been brought up before, and just wanted to make sure that you know that it's in here, is the Nickel Beach, if I can find it here, yes, under the Nickel Beach, there was talk about matting for accessibility for beach goers. And what actually Mr. Lee was able to find was these mobile beach wheelchairs, which are pretty cool. I can send a picture around, but just quickly, if you don't know if you can see this, but it's basically a wheelchair that people can come to the beach. They can then be transferred into this. They can be transferred into this wheelchair and pushed down onto the beach. It has big wheels on it. They won't get stuck in the sand or anything, and they can actually physically go in the water. So we're anticipating, I believe, in purchasing maybe out of this budget, purchasing 5 of those. They'd be available. One of the ideas was that you could reserve them, so we could have something on our website saying, hey, reserve the wheelchair for me. I'm coming in at this particular day. And therefore it would be available for people that would be attending the beach. So I know that was something that was on last year's request, and so bringing it forward. So just wanted to highlight that one because I thought that was very interesting.
Questions? Mrs. Demeray.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Peter or Chris, whichever one wants to answer to this. It's $15,000 that's been allocated for that, $3,000 for each of the 5 wheelchairs, which I think is wonderful, by the way, and I know that people are they'll just be lining up to use these. So it's a great thing, but I'm wondering if this money does account for some system of security for the chairs. Will they be locked in an enclosure? Will they be taken off site each night? How is that going to work? Because, you know, we do have those kinds of issues.
Mr. Lee?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Demeray. To be perfectly honest, there's the specifics / logistics of how we were going to manipulate and handle those hasn't really been discussed among staff. I'm certain that Ashley will have to sit with her beach people and decide how they want to lock them up or not lock them up or bring them back to a secure compound or whatever. The thought process was, as Peter had alluded to earlier, is that they could be either reserved ahead of time if someone was going to the beach, they knew they had that event was happening, the beach staff in this case could make those available. There was also some talk in our discussions about having 1 or 2 available even at Centennial Park. So whichever beach they were requested, we could make those logistics sorted out among staff.
Thank you. That's actually what I was going to suggest as well, is if we could make them available to either of the beaches, that would be a good thing. But no matter which way we go, this is a wonderful addition to our beaches, and I think it's going to go over very well. So thank you.
If there are no further questions, Mr. Bodnar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To whoever could answer this, would this go a little ways, I think it will, if we decided to go for like a blue flag, I think that's what it's called, endorsement of beaches, where you have to provide things like this. And just on this Centennial Beach one, if we do bring one down there, they also need a way to get down to the beach. Yeah. Unless they go downstairs very well. And we had talked about that, or at least I had brought it up before, is there a way to get it down? People took it upon themselves to put 3/4-inch plywood on the stairs last year. So anyways, I think it's a great thing, and at some point we might want to look at those designations for a beach. Thank you.
Mr. Doucette, did you have a question?
Chris, thank you very much for hunting that down. I've had some discussions with some people who had gone there with someone in a wheelchair and couldn't figure out how to get through the sand, and that I can see that happening with that. The only concern I have is one similar to Councillor Desmarais, is that whatever is going to be happening at the beach, we have to make sure that we manage them well, because I can see that becoming a very nice toy, just like some of the kids running down the street with the supermarket carts. So wherever they're going to be, management of it is going to be critical to make sure that they don't get hurt. And I'm talking about not the people, I'm talking about the chairs, okay? And make sure that we don't become liable for kids doing things they shouldn't be doing, okay? So.
Mr. Lee. Have you actually seen these in operation? Do they actually work? Do they do the job that they're intended to do?
Through you, well, to you, Mr. Mayor, yes, actually, I've seen them in beach applications in a number of locations in my ventures south. And to answer more to Councillor Doucette's, what we'd initially thought of was that if an individual was to reserve these or was asking for use of it, they would actually, it would be a no-cost loan, there would be a tracking of it, we know who had it, they'd be responsible for the day, so that we would ensure that they wouldn't get damaged.
And Mr. Sinnes, the cost of these is roughly $2,750 Canadian plus tax?
Mr. Mayor, about $3,000 each.
And we have the funding to cover that.
It is covered in our capital levy, budgeted for $15,000, so looking at we're purchasing 5 of them, and we'll see how that goes, and possibly be back next year purchasing more if it's goes well.
Okay, are we ready for a vote on the capital budget? I don't think we have to vote specifically on that item.
No.
So does someone wish to make a motion? Moved by Councillor Demery and seconded by Councillor Kenny, that we accept the capital budget for 2018.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So
are you ready for a vote?
Yeah, vote on the capital budget, yes. Has that been approved? And okay.
All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried unanimously.
Great. So there is just 3 last quick items, Mr. Mayor, before we go. And on the agenda, after we approve the capital budget, if you remember, we talked about the debt reserves. We had about 5 different debt reserves. And I'm just looking for council's approval to consolidate those 5 debt reserves so that we can use them for all of, like the different debts that we do have, the operations center, the storm sewer, the marina, the east side land. So it's just a matter of semantics of bringing those 5 different reserves, bringing them, consolidating them under one, so then we can use them as a general debt reserve, and I can then fund the different debts as we saw in my presentation at the beginning of the first meeting.
Okay, perhaps we can call for a motion to consolidate those 5 debt reserves, and then we will discuss, because I see Mr. Bodnar has his hands up. Are you moving that, Mr. Bodnar?
Yes, I'll move that.
And seconded by Councilor Doucette, and you had a question.
Yes, I do. So Peter, we're going to consolidate it, but are they then going to remain committed to that debt that they're assigned to?
Through Mr. Mayor, once we consolidate them all, then they're basically committed to the 3 or 4 different debts that we do have, as per the schedule that I provided to council. That it would pay this year the last part of the operations center debt that's we're going to be levying next year. It will pay for the first installment of the storm sewer debt until we bring in forward the storm sewer fees report back to council. And it will continue. It will pay for eventually pay for towards the Valley Center debt, unless we generate some additional revenues through other sponsorships or continuation of sponsorships in the next 3 years. And it will also continue to pay for the full length of the debt for the marina lift and the east side employment lands.
Did you have a question? Any other questions on that? We have the motion. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried unanimously.
The next item, Mr. Mayor, is the downtown CIP. As I mentioned tonight, that it looks like the grant programs are starting to come out. So we're just looking at, from council's perspective, confirming that at this point in time, our top priority is for grant funding is the downtown CIP, and that we would then pursue the granting that is coming out that we would pursue the downtown CIP as the project for those grants.
Mr. Bodnar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Peter. We're not waiting for any provincial money for that. Do we have provincial money? Remind me on that,
Go ahead.
please.
Mr. Louie.
So through your worship to Councillor Bodnar, we've talked about this a number of times over the last year, I guess, and maybe more than a year. And I think I was sitting up here lamenting the fact that there hasn't been a traditional one-third, one-third, one-third type funding program. There's been a few federal programs, there's been a few provincial programs, but none seem to fit this project. I think a few months ago I said that there was an announcement slated for March of a more traditional program, and that announcement was today at 5 o'clock, 5:45 while we were sitting in here, and I can forward it to all of council. And it is, did everybody get it from AMO? Okay. So it's over 14 million, 15 million for for public transit, just over 5 billion for green infrastructure, about 740 million for community culture and recreation, and only 456 million for rural and northern communities, of which we are one, rural that is. So there's two schools of thought out there. Oh, sorry, this program is 40% federal, 33% provincial, and 27% municipal. So if this downtown CIP was to qualify for any of the programs, we would only have to come to the table with 27%, which we think, based on the construction cost of $32 million, the reserve that we hold from selling our NRBN shares is close to 27%. We might have to come up with a small amount to get all the way to 27%. I guess a decision will have to be made by council of which one of those programs to apply for, realizing that we couldn't apply for public transit. We could possibly unbundle the different components of the project and apply for the underground infrastructure under green infrastructure funding. Some of the above ground streetscaping and common public spaces under community, culture and recreation, and maybe the rest under, and public transit for that matter, and the balance of the project under rural and northern community. I think the pro is that you're dividing your ask and maybe asking for a little bit less from each. I think the con is, do you get approved for all three? And if you don't get approved for one or two of the three, can you proceed? I think the other option is to apply for the entire works under rural and northern community and cross your fingers and hope that your application is strong enough that you actually are successful in obtaining the funding. And that would be, I think, what the city would need to proceed with the project. Sorry, that's the end of my answer.
Any questions of Mr. Louie? Madam Demery.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Scott. Scott, I do have a couple of concerns, or questions. One being the actual design of the project and the amount of controversy that has generated. We don't seem to have made any changes based on the input that we've had. And I wonder, can we go forward, or are we in the position to go forward and apply for grants without having done that? That's one. The other one is, would this be one of those situations where we would do well to use the services of a grant writer? Because we want to be absolutely sure we get this funding. So if you could answer those, I would appreciate it.
That's great. Two good questions. Through your worship to Councillor Demery. First of all, we do have an approved design. That might not be what everyone wants to hear, but it was approved a few years back, and it is shovel ready and could be applied for. The jury is still out on whether this council likes that design and whether some members of the public like that design. But staff, we held a meeting in May, I think it was May 5th or so of last year, and really no direction came to staff to change the existing design. We do know that there's question marks, but we need some kind of a direction from council on how to change the design, recognizing there will be cost to changing the design. Going back to an engineering firm and saying, change this, could be in the order of magnitude of $200,000, which isn't budgeted. The project will only be approved for grant funding if it's shovel-ready. They want, the federal and provincial government wants to see a shovel go in the ground, and then they want to cut a ribbon. They don't want to see us go back and design it after we're approved. Second part of your question, I forget already. Oh, yeah, grant writer, sorry. Through your worship to Councillor Desmarais, services of grant writer, I would recommend a different approach for, we've been very successful in getting some funding, OCIF, a number of programs over the years, CIP for the Rose Lawn, but this is one where I would recommend a different approach. What I would like to see council do and the city do is use the services of a professional grant writer, make sure that we are checking all of the boxes that the province and the federal government are looking to have checked by the projects they approve. And we know it's a different game now. They're not just handing out money. They want to see us meet the so-called triple bottom line: economic, environmental, and obviously cultural improvements for the city and the social benefits that come from the projects. The other thing that I would like to see us do is actually go and lobby on behalf of our project, get the MPP and MP to take us to the staff members of the federal and provincial government that are going to be approving these applications, get us a meeting and let us plead our case for funding, because I think that there's a political piece to these applications that can help advance us to the approval stage.
Any other questions, Mr. Bodnar?
Just because Peter brought this up, are you looking for direction on this, Peter, or something we have to, or Scott, just?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think what I was looking for, and I think what staff is looking for, is just confirmation that this is the project that you want us to move forward with for this granting application.
Okay.
Mr. Bodnar?
So I think we've been talking about it, and we said the holdup was the different levels of government coming together at the right time. Sounds like that's lined up, as long as it is like this year or next year's money, not, they say they're gonna do it and it's 2020 or 30 or something before they do it. But anyways, if we can get that other money, I think, the time is right to do it. And as far as the design goes, I think you could go back 3 or 4 times every time you make a design and someone's not gonna like it. I think we gotta move forward on it, and, I'd be good to go if, just from my part of council. Thanks.
Any other comments or questions? Mrs. Kenny, Mr. Main?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're all in favor, of course, of going through with that, but there's always changes in every project, no matter which way you look at it. And right from the very beginning, we heard complaints about bump outs. Major complaints about bump outs. I don't like them. I see them in the downtown section of Ridgeway, and honestly, what they are is a waste of space. So those are things, minor, to me, those are, so you don't put a bump out to save that much bricks. And no one wants them. Like, anybody I talk to that's they don't want them. So are those things that will affect how we feel? Like, I'm all for the improvements in downtown core, but when you're hearing repeatedly no bump outs, how do we fix that or move forward without making that change? Now, do we make that change now? Or we just say we're going to go through with the project no matter what design they give? That's important to me, to know that we still have the ability to go back and say no bump outs. That's important. That's important to me.
Mr. Lee, if we change the plan to delete the bump outs, is that going to be an expensive?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Kenny, as the CAO has said, that there's a cost associated with that. We would have to do some redesigns, there'd be some reconfigurations, radiuses on corners would have to change, and then we would have to, the actual cost on that would be a guesstimate right now, so there is definitely going to be some significant funds have to be spent to fix that.
Any estimate of what significant funds means?
I would venture probably close to what CAO Louis had indicated, probably about $200,000 to do the whole package, to do everything that's involved, because it involves many streets, many intersections, lot of details have to be changed, everything from signage realignments and potential poles and traffic signaling and everything. So there's a number of things that have to be addressed.
So it's also a time factor then.
That is correct.
Mr. May, you had a question, then Mrs. Demeray?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a comment. I'm a player here in the downtown, and I realize that I've had a complaint now that the manhole and drain in front of the break wall has collapsed. And I'm sure if you go all the way down the street, it's the same situation. It's not going to get better. It's going to get worse. I've been in contact with the group with the crosswalk that we all wanted, really badly at the Shoppers. And I realize that in order for that to start, we have to do something with that concept with the CIP in order for this to go ahead. Because they're not going to put the crosswalk in and then 6 months later start the CIP and change the design for that end of it. But I've also talked to some people, and I won't mention any names, that a local developer here said the bump outs would save money because of just the material and the concrete and the labor. And the general estimate from this fellow was around 200,000. So to me, it's balances out, it washes itself out. And so I think if we move on it and we move quickly, I think that $200,000 cost would be a washout. We do really have to start digging in the ground. We really have to get it going. The sidewalks are horrendous. Storm sewers are collapsing. How much longer can we go? I mean, we talked on the strat plan last year. We went from number 6 with the CIP to number 1. So if it's number 1, I think that's what we have to put our direction to, or change it all and put it back to number 6. But we got to go ahead. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mrs. Demeray.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would agree with everything Councilor Maine is saying. We need to move forward. We need to do this quickly. It's obviously not something we can put off any longer. But what we need to do is make a decision about the design. It's either a go or it's not. And we need to do that as quickly as absolutely possible so that we're all of one mind and we can move forward with it. And if it's not a go, then we need to change that as quickly as possible because we can't miss out on this opportunity. So whatever we need to do in order to make those things happen, can we find a way to do that like right away?
Perhaps tonight?
That works.
Mr. Louis, before I take Mr. Bodner?
Well, I guess through your worship to Councillor Demery, I guess on that note, I would have to go back to engineering and see. One of the issues that we're up against is the design is of such an age that many of the people who worked on it don't even work for that company anymore. So to get back the original designers is going to be difficult. I think we're going to have to write a staff report that says, here's what it's going to cost to open up the design, where the money's going to come from, and direction to get a new designer or a new engineering firm, or the same one with different proponents, different workers, back before council to do that design, knowing that we're up against, the announcement was very vague on a date for intakes, didn't say April 30th, May 31st, anything like that. The election could make things very fast, or it could make things farther down the road if they're leaving it up to the new government to actually take in the application. So I think we'll have to go back tomorrow morning and talk about who's going to write that staff report and how fast we can get it.
Possibly we could bypass the staff report by just polling council right now and see who all wants that. So if no one's willing to change the design, then we know that's a moot point. We'll move forward.
Valid.
Mr. Bodner?
Just because we had started the discussion on bump outs, I'm fine with bump outs. As somebody with a disability, the shorter the distance across the road, and I believe bump outs do provide some of that you're already out quite a ways out on the road before you have to get to the other side. And when you can only walk so fast, that's a big deal. I got to tell you, I've had to wait a lot of times for a lot of cars where the normal person could just scoot across. And I'm in Ridgeway all the time. We do a lot of business in Ridgeway with our business. And I tell you, that if you want to see traffic calming, those bump outs, when they squeeze that road a little bit, people don't tend to go fast through there either. I don't have any problem with them at all. I think They're fabulous from a disabled aspect and from a traffic calming aspect. Thank you.
Any other questions on this subject? Well, we have two suggestions on the floor. One is to do a vote tonight on the design as exists. The second one is to wait for a report from engineering as to what the cost may be to include the bump outs as opposed to keeping the bump outs. What is your pleasure, council? Mr. May, then Mrs. Butters.
To me, it's all about the money. If we lose the money, we're in the same spot we were 8 to 10 years when we started the CIP talk. The people downtown who pay quite a bit of tax can't afford to wait any longer. They can't afford the tripping hazards on the sidewalks. They can't afford the sunken roads. So whatever way council goes, you have to take that into perspective. Everybody in town has to take that into perspective, that it has to get done. The more that we delay, then the less chance we have of getting the money. And that's what we have to have. We have to have the money. So.
Mrs. Butters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't see how we could actually make the decision on change or not change the design necessarily tonight without some kind of staff report on the facts of what the facts are if it was changed. Because somebody could say, well, no, I don't want bump out, so I'm gonna vote this way, but they don't have all the facts surrounding that cost, for example. And if they had those facts, it may or may not change their position on it, right? So to me, we can confirm that this is a top priority for us to go forward with grant funding, but I don't see really how we can make the overall big decision of change or not change it until we have at least a little bit more information from our staff on what that really will look like in terms of dollars and cents. Because to my way of thinking, you know, I never really anticipated changing the whole design, because the main bellyache I heard about was the corner of King and Clarence Street, and then up by the bridge. So further east on Clarence Street. All the other bump outs I didn't hear too much bellyaching about, but those two corners is where I heard the most, you know, chirping. So, you know, if you went to that, if that company was approached, I mean, it's like straight lines as opposed to curved lines. I don't know about you, but I could probably take a ruler and, you know, cut off a bump if it was only in two places, like in two locations, as opposed to the whole big thing, right? So my way of thinking is we vote to confirm that our intent is to go forward, but I really think that we should have that other piece of information from staff on what the real cost could look like in change. That's my opinion.
Councilor Demray.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with what you're saying, Councilor Butters, but I'm really, really concerned that with the time that's allotted before the next election, we're going to lose this opportunity if we don't move on it quickly. I think that this is one of those things that's likely to happen sooner than it's going to happen later, and I'm concerned that if we wait for a staff report, we just might lose an opportunity, and that's a very expensive opportunity. So, you know, I would, as much as I don't like many of the bump outs, and from an active transportation standpoint, there were many deficiencies found. From our whole committee went out and looked at it, and they found many deficiencies with the whole design from that standpoint. But still, we do need to move forward, and I would say that sometimes you have to make a sacrifice, and that would be mine. I would say move forward now.
Question to Mr. Lee. How long would it take for a staff report to come back to council?
To you, Mr. Mayor, and the rest of council, depending on what was really wanted in that report, if there would be the questioning of getting a consultant on board to do the changes, getting a price estimate back on those changes, how those documents would have to be altered, and then we would have to get those numbers back. We would, in the staff report, we would have to then present those numbers and what some of the circumstances are that cause those numbers to change. So we're looking at a turnaround of quite a few weeks. It's not going to something that we can snap our fingers and get somebody on board to do this right away. As Councilor Louis had alluded to, or as CAO Louis had alluded to earlier, most of the individuals who were involved in this original design 4 or 5 years ago or even further back, they're no longer in the field with those consulting firms, with that consulting firms. So we'd have to source someone else, and there's a process involved in that. So it's not a timely thing to get a report back. It would probably be somewhere, as I had alluded to with Councilor Doucette just seconds ago, probably somewhere around the end of April would be the soonest we could get numbers back and get dollars and figures in front of council.
At an estimated cost of $200,000.
Essentially, well, hopefully we'd get that price down a bit, but that would be the, probably the end result, yes, right.
Thank you, Councilor Butters, then Councilor Kenny. Councilor Kenny?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As much as I don't like them, I don't like losing money either. I like losing money less. And if we have an opportunity to get money from the feds and the province, I think we need to get on with this grant application form right away, and I'll have to sacrifice the fact that of my dislike for that and move forward.
Thank you. Councilor Doucette?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I agree with that estimate, because it's going to take 2 to 3 weeks, 4 weeks to get a report in. Then we got to find someone. Then that person's got to get on site. And you're talking months before we get anything back from the consultant, probably. We're going to lose the money. We can't do that. So I'm similar to Councillor Kenny. I really don't like the bump outs. But it makes a lot of sense. I had never thought of it that the way Councillor Bodner explained it, that makes a lot of sense to me. So I think we just go with what we've got, and let's get it done, and let's get the money.
Okay, there being no further questions, would someone like to make a motion? Councilor Demery.
I will move that we go forward with the plan as it stands right now and make that a priority, apply for the funding where possible, and just get this done.
Seconder for that motion. Councilor Doucette. Any further discussion? Yes, Councilor Bodner and then Councilor Dash.
Have we decided where our money's going to come from? I heard the hydro funds mentioned, but can we not venture that too? Is that another option?
Absolutely. Mr. Louis.
Okay. Through your worship to Councilor Bodner, and I'll definitely let the Director of Finance and Corporate Services weigh in if you'd like to. This isn't a final approval. Like, when we get to that stage, you'll have a number of staff reports ahead of you. So the NRBN money, I guess it's never really been official, but we've always thought of it at staff and I believe at council as money, excuse me, that we wanted to leverage by being able to effectively triple on a project like this. There is debenture room, and it could be some combination of NRBN proceeds and debentures, or it could be all debentures and those monies stay in reserves and the city continues to hold them. So there's a mix that's available to council, and the point of deciding is farther down the road, I think.
Any further questions?
I just say, as long as we get a shot at having that discussion, that's great.
Who wants to add to that?
Mr. Peter, do you wish to add to that?
Just to add to that, my understanding also of the application process is that if the municipality is actually putting some money towards the project also, that increases our chances of being successful. So I would say that, in order to get money, it all depends on what the ratio is of federal money, provincial money, potentially municipal money, but that would help our application through.
Thank you, Mrs. Ines. Mr. Dench, the final word is yours.
Just on these bump outs and stuff like that, just because I'm living the last dream that you guys decided on here, there's this thing called tractor trailers. And if you have these rollover bump outs, then that's one thing. You've got a couple businesses at the end of town. We hope they never go away. If you're going to crowd these tractor trailers, you're going to limit their ability to get down there. If they're just, like Ron was saying, they're going to go out there and you guys can run over these things with their trucks. You wouldn't believe what goes on Main Street there with these guys trying to get around the corner, and trucks haven't gotten smaller, they've gotten larger. So I hope that's taken into consideration with these bump outs. I'm all in favor of fixing things up. You hear from the merchants downtown about their basements flooding and all that kind of stuff. This is important to get fixed, and infrastructure is a big part of this deal. But I just want to throw my 2 cents in there about these trucks that do go through our community, okay?
Thank you for your comments. Ready for the vote? All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried unanimously. On this issue, something new. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I was just listening to those three possible grants. And I'm looking at something that was approved in the budget and that was requested from engineering. There are renewable passive energy generation for the Colborne Operations Center. And that green part of that grant, could that not be added in? Could this project not be requested in some way, shape, or form as well as part of a request? I'm just trying to find a way to get this done as quickly as possible, if that's, and that may add to that. So I just wanted to throw that in, because the minute you said that, I started looking for this project, because I knew it was in here, I'd seen it. Okay, so maybe through you or to Mr. Lee, one of you can indicate that you'll look into that.
Sure.
Mr. Louie.
So through your worship to Councillor Doucette, the details are very vague on what exactly the requirements are, what the projects they're looking for are, and what will be successfully approved. But definitely, any capital project that staff thinks is going to be able to qualify for any of these programs, we will take a look at. If ever a project was approved that was already funded from the budget, we would just obviously run a surplus, and that money would come back to council because the project would be funded in another way. So we'll continue to do that sort of curating process through the year. Yes.
Okay, that's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Sinnes?
Okay, Mr.
turn it
Mayor,
back to you.
the last item for this evening that I have on my agenda here is the fire capital requirements. As you know, there was a staff report that the fire chief brought forward months ago with regard to some future capital, just to make council aware of certain issues and certain things that are coming that's on the radar. So my recommendation is just to get staff direction from council that what we would do is sit down with the fire chief and prepare a funding plan and do a report back to council at that point in time, and looking at maybe a 10-year plan of the items that the fire chief is looking at, and then bring that back to council for some type of approval.
I would think there is consensus for that. And how soon could that report be prepared?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's not something that is, I don't believe, talk to the mayor, or to the chief, but I don't think it's, in looking at the report, it's not time sensitive in that it's something, there's items that have to be done today. So I would say we would look at preparing that report over the next few months. Once we get through this budget, the water budget, and so on. And then the chief and I can sit down over at some point in time and prepare a financing plan for it.
Perhaps we can hear from Chief Cartwright.
Your worship, and staff and council. I don't want to correct Peter, but all of these items are going to be needed within 5 years.
Yeah.
Not 10 years. I'm not going to worry about it for 10 years, but we need to address them within a 5-year period maximum for all of them.
Yeah.
So I just want everybody to be on the same page. And sure, we can sit down and write out how we're going to finance it. I'm fine with that, but the reality is the needs are there and they're not going to go away. So,
Thank you, Chief. I guess we have a direction there that sooner rather than later would be appropriate for that report.
Yeah. Well, yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, what I meant, it wasn't something that was needed in this budget. It was something that was in the future. 5 years is the future, so we'll look at 5 years, and we'll work on something.
Okay. Mr. Sinnes, further direction this evening?
You have a question?
Alderman Butters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are you looking for somebody to move number 11? Are you, for that staff
Yep.
direction for the
Yes.
fire capital? Because I'd be happy to move that.
Thank you. Seconder? Councillor Demery, seconded. Discussion? There be none, call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, I think we have an approved operating and capital budget for 2018.
Any other comments before we conclude? Councillor Kenny?
Peter, I just want to know the final amount that's going to be on the average household, dollar-wise, not percentage-wise or anything like that. Just give me the final.
71?
$74
74.
on the
Okay.
average. Anywhere between, I should say, anywhere between $74 and $81, depending on what the region does with the tax ratios.
Okay.
Mr. Ness, we appreciate all the work that you did by putting all the information in our budget binder.
Thank you.
It was easy to understand and easy to follow, and
Good.
it wasn't a chore that we all worry about. And also members of staff who assisted you. We are very appreciative of their efforts as well. You make our job much easier.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
We have a question from Mr. Bodner, then Mr. Main.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Peter, just because people watching may not know what an average household, value is, could you give us that so they can do the math on their own home?
Good question, Councillor Bodnar, through you, Mr. Mayor. The average assessment, residential assessment in 2018 was $185,605, up from last year's 2017 average, which was $180,679 was the average last year.
Is that okay, Mr. Bodner, for the question? Okay, Mr. Main, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, to Peter, and Ashley too, I suppose. When can I expect this report on the marina, like a report that I can actually read? Well, the business statement for the store, number one.
Ms. Gregg, do you have a comment, or we have
Thank you,
Chris
through,
in the audience here tonight? Chris, you're going to respond to Mr. Main?
Awesome. Okay.
You'll get used to it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Main, I would put that at it's 2 weeks. You'll have something in your hand in 2 weeks.
First meeting in April.
Yeah, that's fast.
No, it's not. I should have had this before budget, not after budget, is what I'm trying to say.
Mr. Louis?
Sorry, through your worship to Councillor Main, I just want to make sure that staff has a good understanding of what you want. Because the city has statements. We predict our revenues, we predict our expenses. We can produce variance reports and see if we've made our budget or not. But business plans, I think are probably, like, we don't have a business plan for the library, we don't have a business plan for the Valley Health and Wellness Center. I'm sure that corporate businesses in Port Colborne have business plans. So I guess my question is really to Chris, do you have a good understanding of what council wants to see?
I believe I do. He's looking for a solid business plan that shows basically how the operation works. So I think that's truly what is. No, that's not what you're looking for.
I've belonged to the marina for a long time. I know how the operation works. Trust me. What I'm talking about is basically I can use the store as an example.
Okay.
And I'm not picking on anybody.
Yep, no,
But if you're going to run a business, just like any other business in town, including Mr. Tim Plain or even Canadian Tire, and you're selling the same products,
Yes.
the rules have to be the same. You have to be able to cover your expenses, right? You have to be able to buy your product at a certain price. You have to be able to have a proper markup, yet that markup has to be used to pay for wages, the taxes if they're applicable there. And at the end of the day, if you're claiming that you've made money at the marina, then I'll give you a quick example. This is what I found today. And you can answer this, Peter, if you want. You can step in. We budgeted 118,000, yeah, 118,000 on the 270 for salaries and wages, and our actual was 42,000. Where does all the extra salary come from? Does it come from the pool, or does it come from the money collected at the marina? Who pays the salaries, number one?
It's the next.
I couldn't find this and
Through
figure it
you,
out.
Mr. Mayor, all the salaries for the marina are within the marina's budget, under their accounts, their department accounts.
Their apartment accounts, how are they funded? Are they funded by revenue, or are they funded by what we approve here at the budget?
They are funded by the revenue of the marina, and the overall marina, the revenues and expenditures are within the overall corporation's budget.
So what you're saying to me is, we do make a profit at no cost to the taxpayer.
Correct.
So the taxpayer pays absolutely nothing to that marina.
Correct.
Okay. I've got that. I'm sorry?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the budget that we have this evening that's been passed, actually about $30,000 is subsidizing or reducing the overall tax levy. So the marina is actually contributing back to the taxpayers, rather than the marina being paid for by the taxpayers.
Okay. If I have permission, I'm going to share this business plan with Chris. I'll come there tomorrow or the next day.
Sure.
And show him how I run my business. And I expect the store to run the same way. You might make money on revenue on all the docks. I think there's 450 docks, 500 docks?
700.
But
700.
No, there's 700 docks. How many
Yeah,
boats? I mean,
five.
that's who pays, right?
Yeah,
700 docks don't pay.
Approximately 500, just over 500.
Yeah, okay.
Through you, Mr.
So,
Mayor.
if you don't mind me coming and talking to you and sharing this with you, I would appreciate it. It would set my mind at ease, and maybe it would set your mind at ease.
Hold on. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Maine.
Okay.
This isn't set up as a normal retail store, though. My office is set there. The store is there. My wage is being paid to run. I do multiple things at the marina. The store is there. There's not a person sitting there at the cash register, twiddling their thumbs, waiting to come in and buy a product.
That addresses that. I take that into
Okay,
consideration.
okay.
I realize that you have more than one job there.
Yeah, okay.
I'm just talking strictly the operation of the entities that work at the marina, the hot dog shop, the restaurant up top. I could understand those budgets, but I couldn't understand this one at all. No idea. So we'll talk about it this week.
Yep,
Is that all right
sounds
with
good.
you? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
We'd like to make you happy, Mr. Maine. Thank you for your inquiry. Okay. Yes, Ms. Gregg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just, I'd like to just clarify so that staff are clear. Councilor Maine, you're looking for a business plan for the store, correct? Not the overall marina operations? Just want to make sure that I'm clear on that.
I understand that part.
Store?
But I didn't understand the store part.
Okay, so
I looked over, the worksheets, that whole business, right? One row says gas, the next row says fuel. I know we have diesel, we have gas. Things like that. To me, that's important. That's the way I run all my businesses. I have to be able to look at it and understand it. And I don't know if I'm the only one, and I'm sure Frank runs his business that way. So it would make me feel better, give me peace of mind, if I could sit down and talk with Chris and Mark, just over this. So next year, maybe I won't be here next year, but for the future council, the budget's a lot simpler to understand where this money goes and where it comes from. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I appreciate the
Ms.
time.
Gregg. There being no further business, we call for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Alderman Danch, seconded by Alderman Doucette. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you again, Peter and staff. Meeting is adjourned.